So basically, the rationale for using best value engineering or contracting and the emission of a performance bond was done to ensure, basically, that F&L development became the developer. It was done to facilitate a more rapid and complete development of the community center and the motel. It facilitated because it saved him some money, and it just expedited everything. As I remember the discussion going, is that not a fair statement?
I'm not sure it's not that it's unfair. It's just that I think you're characterizing some things that were done. And from my understanding, if we look at the RFP was heavily dependent on the fact that there was no way that this city by itself could afford to build a 450-person center with the assets we had identified. However, if relying on a partnership between the public and private, it was believed that such could be done, requiring both sides to commit something to making it happen. The city laid out the assets it had and the expectations of what it wanted built, and the expectation that at the end of the day that structure would belong to the city and be owned by the city. And if we go back and look at the RFP, I think that's what dictated the agreements that came, whether it was with F&L or Mr. Sri or anyone else that would have been chosen. That's what was necessary if it was going to get done. Because nowhere in there did it say, and we're going to pay for it all, or that we had this so that money was no concern. That was never understood as part of the process. But it did have to have, it couldn't be just built and then left at 100 people either. It had to hold 450 people. It had to have certain things to accommodate 450 people going to the bathroom, for having a banquet, having a kitchen, a preparatory kitchen for some other person to come in and be able to transfer food to a banquet, for example. And then there were some things that weren't specified that ultimately got put in at the developers, the other side of the equation, saying it would be nice if you had this in your place, and putting those things in, saying we think we should have this in there, like the in-floor heat, that type of thing.
Okay. So the city committed FEMA funds.
The city committed what it had in FEMA funds. It committed an average annual, what it was had spent on the Tenborg Center. We roughly spent $20,000 a year. It committed that. I just don't remember everything that's in there, but it's in the RFP of what we were willing to commit.
Right, and Mr. Suri, through F&L, was willing to commit $100 and some thousand to the completion, the successful completion of the community center.
Whatever that number is, that's what he'd have to complete to build beyond what he could build for that. So when you talk about best value, that's where using the private sector, you're able to leverage those discussions without having to do it as we normally do in the public, where we, talk to 5 people and take the lowest bid, and we don't really have much control whether it's quality or whether it gets built the way we really want it to get built.
But throughout the whole thing, that this is what befuddles me a little bit about the discussion that I listened to on my cell phone, and it just seems to me like there was a firm commitment by Mr. Suri, F&L acting as F&L development, and the city with regard to these facts that we just talked about. And I guess I don't understand why at this point he feels he has any justification or how, you know, the city should be allowed to let them do this, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a facility that we were willing to commit to, and it started, and it needs to be finished. So, you know, throughout that whole discussion, what I could hear off and on, it just seemed to me like there's no way that we should be allowing him to renege on his obligation to complete that community center. I understand if he doesn't have the financing lined up for his motel at this point, that, you know, that needs to wait a while. But at the same time, that shouldn't preclude the continuing work. And what I understand is that, you know, he's not paying the subcontractors. Puts Rushford in a really bad light, and between a rock and a hard place, which is not always comfortable.
No, and I understand, I think where you're coming from, Vern. The part that I think you need to weigh in on a little bit. Developers are